I'm going to be talking about my project Oral Contract, of which the piece downstairs is kind of is inside, and both can exist autonomously. But I'm going to connect the piece that is exhibited downstairs to other work, and then actually screen the new work. So this piece I've made for this exhibition is a new work. I thought it's nice to screen it, and then maybe if there's questions, it's a good moment to talk about them, because it's very fresh for me too. So this project, Aural Contract, it's A-U-R-A-L contract, and it's really looking at trying to. There's a bit of feedback on the mics. Can you turn them down a bit? Thanks. Really trying to look at the contemporary politics of listening, and what it does is use the role of the voice in law as a kind of agent in order to do that, as a way of kind of accessing those ideas about listening, and how listening is implicated in sort of broader decisions that are made about people's lives, and the way people have political activity and agency. And the reason why the law was so interesting for me is because of recordings like this one.
The Honorable, the Chief Justice and the Associate Justices of the Supreme Court of the United States. Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. All persons having business before the Honorable, the Supreme Court of the United States are admonished to draw near and give their attention, for the court is now sitting. God save the United States and this honorable court.
So, the fact that the law is called vocally into existence, that spaces somehow don't really have...
The Honorable, the Chief Justice and the Associate Justice...
Sometimes doubled legal spaces. No, that spaces don't really have the authority to carry out justice until these sort of white magic incantations are chanted. And I was very interested in that specific use of the voice, because not only did it represent for me a particular use of language, of course, but in this moment where he shifts to the singing of oh yeas, oh yeas, oh yeas, it also kind of started me thinking about the voice, the kind of non-verbal aspects of voice, and also the what it does to have this kind of sonic vehicle for language in that system. Why does it need to be spoken aloud? Why does it need to be heard in order to become legislation? The track I just played is part of a growing audio archive, which is looking at all these things. It takes a lot of examples from trials, interviews I've done with people like stenographers, voice coaches who work with lawyers to train their voices, and also lots of things from kind of fiction films, from text as well, that all start to describe different ways of listening that somehow become affective upon people's lives. So kind of political ways of listening and thinking about that. And also what's embedded in there is a lot of kind of new technological changes, such as algorithmic-based lie detectors, which use the voice as a means to understand if somebody is stressed or not, if the kind of vocal cords are straining to be, that would indicate that they're lying or not. So there's a lot of attention also to these things and how they're marketed and how sound is being talked about. So that's the idea of this archive. And the components of this large archive, which is called an archive, but it's not really an archive because it doesn't pose an authority on the subject, but it's more a kind of track list. I have about 40 tracks, and I also chuck stuff out of it all the time and take stuff into it. And this archive, sort of moments from this archive, tracks from this archive get expanded and blown up in my work and end up being sort of longer, like half-hour audio documentaries or narrative audio essays, these kinds of things, which focus on one story as a means to understand things like the relationship between listening and human rights or borders, And this kind of series of works is about understanding the changing role of testimony in the face of new immigration policies and everything else that I'm talking about today. And it's particularly with this relationship of voice and border that I wanted to expand today's discussion, or like have that be the major focus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present two works, one called The Freedom of Speech Itself, and then I'm going to show this piece, Language Gulf in the Shouting Valley, which is downstairs. And I think you'll see there's a kind of non-direct relationship between them. So The Freedom of Speech Itself is a half-hour radio or audio documentary that is looking at a policy that's been going on in the UK since 2001, which is that asylum seekers who arrive in Britain are given an accent test to see if their accent is the same as the place in which they claim to originate from. And this is also happening in Holland, in Belgium also, in Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland. And basically what's going on is that there's a company based in Sweden called Sprakab, and they hire refugees to basically listen on the phone to asylum seekers in a special interview that's organized to elicit speech from asylum seekers. And the asylum seekers speak, and sometimes it's kind of longer monologues, often very short things, strange questions that are designed to elicit details which they have not been asked before. And this company then sent back a report to the immigration authorities. So there's really two companies that are doing this. They're both based in Sweden. And their whole system is anonymized. Uses anonymized analysts, and that's something very problematic also in the space of the law, in the sense that you have no idea where really these people are from who are doing the tests, and that's one of the first problems of many actually with this whole policy. So it basically formalized a relationship that was already happening within the asylum system, whereby someone would do an interview with an asylum seeker, and the border agent would do an interview with the asylum seeker, and then afterwards he would ask the interpreter, where do you think he's from? But of course this was never admissible, so there's a kind of whole infrastructure produced around this kind of mode of questioning that means that now the interpreter is employed by a specific company, and a report comes back which has like phonetic alphabet, and it's linguistically cleared and made proper, scientific looking. But in fact it's done over the phone, and often asylum seekers are not really clear what's happening to them. It ignores common conditions of refugees, like for example living outside of the country in which they come from for many years, which is the case of somewhere like Somalia. Many people come from Kenyan refugee camps. And it also kind of takes back linguistics, and linguists are very kind of upset about this whole issue because of course it says something which linguistics got rid of a long time ago, which is that an accent ends at a border and begins again on the other side. And so why I was really interested in this story is because of a kind of really violent synchronization that has to happen when you take something like the voice, which is very contagious, very kind of slippery, very well, like all of us, we know like that we speak constantly differently depending on the interlocutor in which we're speaking to. And so you take something like the voice and you have to synchronize it with something like as bureaucratic as a passport or as a legal document. So it's this like huge reduction of something very complex and socially produced and culturally articulated, and especially in the case of asylum seekers. And I heard many stories when I was making this documentary, and one of them was that of a guy called Sonny Michaels, who was he was a Creole Sierra Leone speaker, and he was tested in English after 9 years of being in England, and told that his English was too good and he must come from Nigeria. So, in fact, he was sent back to Nigeria. And also, there was another very shocking story, which then becomes the kind of crux, the story that runs throughout this documentary, the single case, which is the story of Muhammad Barakat, who, after he was a Palestinian from Jenin, and after the UK border agency lost his Palestinian identity documents, his UN documents, they decided they needed to do an accent test on him. They did a test, and among very few words came back the results that he was in fact Syrian and not Palestinian. And Jenin is 22 kilometers away from the Syrian border, just to give you an idea. So that's the story of Muhammad Barakat. This syllable is the sound that provides the UK border agency with the apparent certainty of Muhammad's Syrian origin. The border agency designates this syllable as a Syrian national, and it implies that this vowel used in the word tomato is coterminous with Syria's borders. But locating this Syrian vowel in the speech of a Palestinian surely proves nothing more than the displacement of the Palestinians themselves. In other words, the instability of an accent, its borrowed and hybridized phonetic form, is testament not to someone's origin, but only to an unstable and migratory lifestyle, which is of course common in those fleeing from conflict and seeking asylum, often spending years getting to this country and living in diversely populated camps along the way. Is it not more likely then that a genuine asylum seeker's accent would be an irregular and itinerant concoction of voices, a biography of a journey rather than an immediately distinguishable sound, a pure voice that avows its unshakable roots to a single place? The fact that this syllable designates citizenship above an identity card that contradicts it forces us to rethink how borders are being made perceptible and how configurations of vowels and consonants are made legally accountable. So what is the legal status of our voices? What is the connection of our accent to citizenship? And is there any law that stipulates how our voices should conform with our national borders? Can this phoneme renounce its Syrian citizenship?
You know what this reminds me of, actually? It reminds me of. I'm not. I mean, I heard this because I wasn't in Lebanon during the Civil War, but I heard stories that the Christian militia, you know, the right wing, what do they call the phalangists, the Kataib, right? They used to have these checkpoints, and so when a car would stop, they would stop a car, and they would walk up to the driver and open a window and stick a tomato in his face, right? Or a tomato, you know, and said that there would be like, what's this? Now, if the guy said banadura, let's translate that to tomato, they would let him pass because that was the Lebanese way of saying it, right? If he said bandora or tomato, that would be the Palestinian way of saying it. So they would ask him to step out, and now no one knows what happened to these guys who were asked to step out, you know. But you can, I'm sure, use your imagination. They were never found, you know.
So where are you from?
What do you mean? I'm from Hackney.
Hackney, London, but you're Danish, aren't you, Mahdi?
No, I'm Palestinian. Well, I grew up in Denmark.
From where in Palestine?
I'm not from Palestine.
So where are you from?
We're Palestinians from a refugee camp in Lebanon, Ain al-Hilwi.
Okay, so you were born in Lebanon.
No, I was born in Dubai.
Oh, so how come you have an American accent?
What do you mean?
Well, you have an American twang to your English?
I just, Eddie Murphy and Stallone and all these guys,
Ah, from Hollywood.
No, I'm from Hackney.
So in my works, there's often an understanding of the voice as always doubled, the kind of object voice and the subject voice, which are embedded into one single testimony. So here it's the kind of accent, and it's the it's the words. So there's kind of two testimonies that are produced by one person, one single voice. And these testimonies can either corroborate one another or they can contradict one another's account of events. And what is made obvious in this case of forensic listening is a shift in the way the law listens, a radical remixing of these two voices, a remix which produces an imbalance in the political order of the voice and in the molecular structure of language. This shift in listening shows an emerging phrenology of the voice, opening up a whole set of rather profound questions. Questions about borders, about the legal consequences of our accents, about the relationship of science and the law, about speaking the truth, and about free speech. For doesn't this shift in listening force us to extend the idea of free speech to also encompass the sonic quality of speech itself? Now it seems that the battle for free speech is no longer about fighting to speak freely, but fighting for the control over the very conditions of which we are being heard. And that brings me to this work I'm presenting here, Language Gulf in the Shouting Valley. Because one of the front lines of this battle over the conditions over which we are being heard can be seen there, because it's another way of looking at the relationship of voice and border. And it allows us also to think about what is a border more sort of concretely, in the sense that, and this is also the case in the previous example, in the sense that a border is really a legally defined space where two jurisdictions meet one another. So one authority starts and the other one begins on the other side. So a legally defined space where two jurisdictions meet. And what is a jurisdiction? If we divide the term jurisdiction, which connotes a territorial range over which a legal authority extends, we see that juris refers to a legal authority or right, and diction refers to speech. Diction in linguistics is also defined as a manner of enunciating and uttering words. And so not simply speech, but the process of enunciation and amplification of words. So by understanding the term jurisdiction as two parts, we see that the law itself operates as a speech space, in which those within its range of audibility are subject to its authority. As a fundamental principle of legal governance, jurisdiction reveals to us the power of sound in the construction of the space and time of the law. Much like radio in the workplace, the audio medium offers the law a means of controlling space and interpolating its subjects while remaining predominantly out of sight. And to continue this reading of jurisdiction, in the film I present here, I am using the Druze religious minority as a means to continue this reading. And so I don't know if you know who the Druze are, but maybe I just say one or two lines. It's very banal if you do know who they are. But it's a religious minority throughout the Levant region, so Lebanon, Israel, Syria, Jordan, and Palestine. And they are similar to Ismailism in its incorporation of Platonic and other philosophies into the Islamic religion. And why the Druze are kind of important for me in this work is because they are a transnational community who are always trying to define themselves within the kind of confines of the nation states in which they live in. So in each different context, say between Syria and Israel, there's a totally different kind of relationship to politics or self-identification within the regime's ideology and all of those things, because of a sort of process of survival, and that's kind of interesting when you zoom out, because what you see is that somehow they really occupy this border space. They inhabit it. Sometimes they sort of transgress it, but really what they do is start to disturb the very reductive nationalist narratives in which they're engulfed. When you see people actually living in between those kind of cracks, you start to have, you start to see things slightly differently. And another reason was because often the way this border is performed, this kind of inhabitation of the border by this community, is really through the voice. So, for example, in a way that is not really an accent way of identifying oneself, to not produce a sort of regional accent as a mode of identification, the Druze all identify with one another through speech by pronouncing all the phonemes of the Arabic language correctly. So, for example, the qaf, which is often dropped in many of the dialects in that region, instead of saying af, they say qaf, which is a commonly used letter which is dropped. And this is a means of kind of, performing this identity. But it's also a way into understanding a certain relationship to truth speech, which comes back to kind of the testimony that I was talking about before, in the sense that in the religion you can in fact lie about your religion. You can say that you're not Druze if you want to protect yourself. But you have to do that saying all the phonemes of the language correctly. So there's a kind of there's a kind of shift there, again, to truth not being embedded in words, but in the kind of object quality of speech. And the two examples that make up the film I'm going to play now are also somehow very articulate about this relationship of kind of truth, speaking the truth and performing these kind of border spaces and these jurisdictions, sometimes transgressing them, sometimes enforcing them. And the two stories that constitute the film I'm going to show you is the Druze soldiers who are, since 1948, have been conscripted into the Israeli army, who translate, because of their sort of bilingual position, their border position, translate between Hebrew and Arabic in the Israeli military courts. So it's really a space where speech acts, and a kind of very heavy burden on a young series of conscripts who have to, in fact, wear the Israeli military uniform and perform their proximity to the enemy through language. And the other story is that of the Shouting Valley, which you will hear described more in the film. So I'll play that, and maybe if there's any questions afterwards, I could take them. It would be very nice.